Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon. My name is Weronika Gawinska-Bulikis. I represent the Janusz Kurtyka Foundation, and I have the honor to invite you to a conference entitled The Seeds of History, Polonia and the Polish Diaspora and Polish People Abroad as Ambassadors of Poland's Reputation. And I would like to welcome our guest today, that is Dr. Lucja Mirowska-Kopeć, the President of the Alliance of Polish Clubs in the USA. Hello, I would like to welcome the experts, the Janusz Kurtyka Foundation representatives and all the participants. Professor Tadeusz Wolsza, the winner of the first edition of the competition for Janusz Kurtyka Prize for his book Encounter with Katyń. Good afternoon, Professor. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be once again with all of you. Mr. Paweł Kurtyka, the president of the Janusz Kurtyka Foundation. Hello. Hello, good afternoon. I would like to welcome all the speakers and our audience. Bartłomiej Chabrowski, the Canadian Polish Congress.
Witam wszystkich Państwa. Cieszę się, że mogę partycypować w tej na pewno bardzo ważnej, wartościowej konferencji. Także jest z Kanady i witam wszystkich Państwa. Dziękuję bardzo.
I would like to welcome everyone. Also, Tomasz Szybowski, the Polish culture, Jan Setowski, Canadian Polish Congress, Toronto branch. Hello, everyone. Dr. Jean Sokołowski, president of PASI EDU. Hello.
Yes, thank you. We're honored here to represent PASI EDU and present perhaps an American perspective. Thank you very much.
Pan Tomasz Szybowski, Polska
Mr. Tomasz Szybowski, the Polish Cultural Foundation in Clark. Is Tomasz with us? If not, he might be somewhat late. And the meeting shall be moderated by Daniel Pogorzelski. Hello. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to see everyone. And the Seeds of History project is financed by the Chancellor of the Prime Minister as part of the Polish Diaspora and Poles Abroad 2021 competition. The blogpress.pl is a media partner of this project, and I would like to give the floor to Mr. Daniel Pogorzelski. Thank you very much. So tonight, this conference is going to be rather a free-flowing conversation and exchange of opinions on the topic of how to promote the history of Poland, how to take care of the good name of Poland, and what is it that we missed? What is it that we need to pay attention to? What are the opportunities, but also what are the threats? So I hope that the members of our project will have an opportunity to exchange viewpoints, suggestions, and ideas for cooperation. And I think that there is a great need to have a meeting like this. Therefore, I would like to thank you very much that we have this possibility of talking in this group. I would like to thank for all the work that you do at the Janusz Kurtyka Foundation, and every one of you is taking part at this meeting. Thank you very much for that. And I would like to give the floor to Mr. Professor Wolsza. Professor, over to you. Thank you very much. Once again, I would like to welcome everyone most cordially at this meeting. I do hope that this is not the last meeting, and it's actually the second one this year, but that's the end of the year, and undoubtedly there are going to be more interesting and valuable ideas promoted by the Janusz Kurtyka Foundation next year. Tonight, I would like to talk about our history, about the history of Poland, as this is the history that we should not be ashamed of. And this is very important. Our history is not only beautiful, it is also very different if we compare it with the histories of other nations, the histories that have been blemished by crimes and something that others are trying to conceal from the public eye. But the Polish history is different. In the 19th and the 20th century was particularly very interesting and worth speaking about, and this history is awash with the dramatic events, but that drama resulted in beautiful examples that should be cherished, it should be demonstrated, that should be talked about, and that should be presented and talked about in different discussions, and we can speak with pride about those events. There is nothing to be ashamed of. And today I would like to offer a couple of topics, and given the fact that our time is determined, therefore I shall not take much time, but I simply wanted to flag a couple of topics and to present a couple of arguments that may be touched upon during this discussion. And I hope that this discussion is to be continued. So it's perhaps not only today, but also in the future, we'll have an opportunity to talk about these events in the Polish diaspora, for instance, and to use these arguments. So what is it that I would like to talk about today? First and foremost, I would like to talk about the way a nation can cope with the partitions, because we know that the partition of the Polish state was a very dramatic event, and still the statehood survived, the belief survived, the faith survived, and also the will to fight for independence survived, and also the will to have some political thought that later on resulted in independence. And so that is the first quite interesting point for me. And then I would like to move on to something that is linked with the first topic. So we know that the independence was regained, but then there was a question of fight for the borders and the protection of independence. So that is the continuation of the first topic. And I'm thinking about the situation of the Second Republic of Poland and of the Bolshevik Polish War, and also I'm thinking about Roman Dmowski, Piłsudski, and Ignacy Paderewski, the great persons of the time, and they are highly recognizable all over the world. And I think that those persons are so important and are so great merit, not only to Poland, that they deserve to be shown, to be presented also abroad. And another important topic that I would like to say a few words about. Those are two phenomena. The first of them is a unique, unprecedented phenomenon, something not to be seen in other countries, be it in Europe or all over the world. And what I mean is the Polish underground state. In 1939 through 1945, the government, the state in exile, and that is of utmost significance, and something that was not done by anyone else during World War II in occupied Europe. And if we are talking about the Polish underground state, of course, we should not forget about the Polish state abroad, because the Second World War did not finish the functioning of the Polish government in exile, and all those institutions that had been functioning in the period 1939-1945, and they had been established in France or in Great Britain, and they were dispersed all over the world, but they were still functioning, and nothing of the sort was done neither by the Czechs, nor by the Hungarians, nor by the Bulgarians, nor by the Romanians, and the governments in emigration. There were more than a dozen of the government in exile in London, but the Polish government was the most important one. It was number one, and the activities of the authorities, of the Polish authorities, resulted in the development of structures, government structures. Another point and another topic, and we're going to talk about World War II again, that is the Polish armed forces in the West. That is a topic of utmost significance. We were the fourth largest military force on the Allied side during World War II. So after the US and Great Britain, after 1941, after the Soviet Union, but larger than the French troops, because it was the Polish armed forces that were the most faithful allied to the Anglo-Saxons during World War II. And again, here we are talking about General Anders, General Stanisław Maczek, and those are the creators of the Polish enigma, Rajewski, Zygalski, Łużycki. Those are the Poles who, in the occupied Poland, made this beautiful gesture of saving the Jews from death. And those are the Poles that have been decorated with the honor of righteous among the nations. And again, that is the contribution of Poles. And this is a very important contribution. And of course, we still have not been able to determine all of the names, but we do know a lot. And what we know shows a very clear evidence that we are definitely number one as far as saving the Jews in occupied Europe is concerned. Another topic to talk about, it's obviously John Paul II, and he is a very much historical figure. And he is our compatriot, heroic compatriot, who not only maintained the good spirit in the Polish people, and thus the Polish people were capable of discarding the communist yoke and gaining independence, but also he traveled around the world. He had more than 100 foreign trips, but he spoke about Poland. He spoke well about Poland, and Poland is very much identified with him, associated with him. Poland is a heroic country, a patriotic country of honest people. So Poland, due to him, is seen very much in a positive way. And of course, John Paul II brought in that good spirit, but there is yet another important organization that had reinforced, augmented that good image of Poland around the world, and that is Solidarity, the Solidarity Trade Union. That is the largest social movement probably in the history of the world, because we're talking about 10 million strong union. We're talking about 10 million of our compatriots who at a certain point of time understood that it was possible to change things in a peaceful way, that change was possible in a peaceful way, that the state could be restored, a different state, a non-communist state could be restored in a peaceful way. Therefore, the trade union Solidarity showed that path to other European, Central European and Eastern European people under the yoke, and showed the way to freedom. And the Polish way to freedom was a long one. It started in 1980, and together with the establishment of the Solidarity Trade Union, there were some other organizations before that, obviously, but let us assume that 1980 as the date of the registration of the Solidarity Trade Union in court is the beginning. And in fact, we know about the events of 1989, but that set an example to the Czechs, to the Hungarians, who based on the Polish experience, and this is how they were capable of gaining their independence much faster. But undoubtedly, the Polish example was of great significance, and it was not the collapse of the Berlin Wall, because had there been no solidarity, but for solidarity, the wall would have been standing there. So I am not delving into details and discussions of who was the most important person in solidarity, because right now this is beyond the scope of our discussion today, but the movement matters. So the Solidarity Trade Union, 10 million people, that is what matters. And of course, people are important, but not only some few people were determining about the mission, because the entire mission turned out to be a success. Lech Wałęsa could not possibly win against the communists all alone. And undoubtedly, his opinions may be sometimes shelved. But as far as solidarity is concerned, there is one more important thing to talk about. So how to survive through the martial law, because that is, again, yet another positive example. The Poles being tried hard during the World War II and during the Stalinist epoch, and in the times of the second conspiracy, that is 180,000 young Poles at that time who, after the World War II, did not cease their fight for freedom. So this is how the Poles learned to live in conspiracy. So that is the experience of the Polish military organizations in World War II, in the beginning of World War II, also the Home Army, the Polish underground state. The second conspiracy after the war gave us a really good example how not to give up, how not to capitulate in the time of hardships, but slowly, step by step, keep on acting and eventually win independence. And this is what was happening during the martial law for many people. It was very much a dramatic course of events, and some people picked up open fight. But then the Poles assumed different tactics. That is, they decided to build their structure step by step, gradually. And this is how they were gradually leading to the ideals of independence. And the international situation was very much conducive. That was the case before World War I, after World War I, and the confluence of events helped us to regain independence. The Second World War did not give us the success because we won the war, but we lost peace, and we were occupied by the Soviet Union. But then in 1989, the international environment was conducive to us.
I to wszystko, myślę, to są te najpiękniejsze przykłady, jakie można czerpać z naszej narodowej historii.
From our national history. And these most beautiful examples that can be drawn from our national history are worth cherishing. Of course, you can somehow grade them because there are those more important ones, because you can have your ranking list and you can recognize some of them as first plane, most important ones, and you'll say they are undisputable, and you need those numbers 1, 2, 3, and then down to 10. But you need to realize that and to acknowledge that this list will be different for every one of us. If we considered, for example, this chronological approach, I've just used it. I didn't go for significance because everyone would like or can have a different look at it, but chronologically, that is what you see. All that starts in the late 18th, early 19th century, when Poland is partially already broken. We have Kościuszko insurrection, the uprising, and that's where it starts. Then we have a whole period of partitioning of Poland, which was not wasted. When Poland was partitioned, many different ways of progressing were born. Organic work at the foundation of the society. Patriotism is stimulated by the development of paramilitary organizations. We also have attempts at professional diplomacy. That's what Dmowski does through the Polish National Committee. Then Piłsudski is military, and Paderewski and Dmowski are diplomacy, national education, because without education, there's nothing we could talk about, because if Poles don't understand what's going on in the world, what priority tasks are, what the task number one is, that's the fight for independence, what can go to the second plane. Without that, it would be hard to rally the society to fight, to struggle. That's why I believe that a great achievement of the time of the partitioning of Poland was creation of this modern nation, as Dmowski called it, a nation that can understand what the goals and purposes are on the first plane, what you need to focus your attention on, and how you need to build a powerful society, a society that would be capable of understanding that independence is something nobody's going to give us free of charge, and that the situation we had in the 19th and early in the 20th century is something that you need to fight for. Of course, there are different ways to go fighting. It can be through education, paramilitary, diplomatic, the use of international circumstances. These are three paths leading to independence. When those three collided, when those three melded, this independence broke up in 1918. Hence, if not in the past, it must have been 3 years ago when historians were considering the architects of independence. Those most important included Piłsudski, Dmowski, Ignacy Paderewski, Ignacy Witos, but also Ignacy Daszyński, Wojciech Korfanty, and Kazimierz Sosnkowski. So people, politicians. There was also General Haller, who represented different paths, different roads leading to independence. There were those who supported armed struggle, enough to mention Piłsudski. There were also those who spoke much more about education, diplomacy, Dmowski, for example. And there were those who traveled around the world and spoke beautifully about Poland, and they had specific opportunity for that. Ignacy Jan Paderewski was a fantastic pianist who knew how to play, but he played so efficiently to the hearts, to the minds of people all around the world that he was vociferous about the need to have Poland resurrected. And with all his talks, all his negotiations, he won plenty of sympathy for Poland. A beautiful example that we can show without a shadow of doubt all around the world. Polish paths to independence. They are bedecked with diplomacy, armed fight, culture, education, science. So everyone will find a very important element for themselves. But independence was not given to us forever. Then came the fight, the struggle for borders. Poland was the largest country in the world. That's not true, but that was a joke born early in the 20th century, because at a press conference, a journalist asked a Polish politician how big Poland is, and the politician answered, Poland is the largest state in the world because it has no borders. Poland has to fight for borders everywhere. In the West, Upper Silesia, Greater Poland. In the South, the Chechen Silesia. In the East, Lwów. Going further north, Vilnius or Wilno. Then came the Polish Bolshevik War, conflicts with Lithuanians. So we were in a very difficult situation because wherever we were, we fought for every little corner of Polish land. Some said that Poland would go as far as the Polish speech can be heard. And that's more or less the concept for the development of the Polish state. But Poles knew how to win Lwów, Vilnius, capture Poznań, save some land in the south, in a very difficult conflict with the Czechs, who theoretically could have always been our allies, but there were border controversies. And then Poles were capable of winning this grand Polish Bolshevik War and save peace, not only for themselves, but downright for entire Europe, because the Bolshevik aspirations reached far, perhaps up to the Pyrenees. The fire of the revolution was to be carried by the Red Army not only to Germany and Austria, no, it was going to go further, if they succeeded, even to France. Europe was tired after the First World War, and that Europe was open to those ideas that the communist revolution carried from Russia. And to stop that revolution was something that only Poles knew how to do. No one else could do it in 1919 or 1920. The genius of Józef Piłsudski, and first of all, the heroic attitude of all our society. Of course, I exclude here a handful of communist degenerates who wanted to subjugate Poland to Soviets and to deliver it to them as another Soviet republic, but 98%, that's my assessment. Perhaps there was perhaps not even 1% of communists. All the others knew how to fight and wanted to fight for freedom. And then to appreciate that freedom, that independence. Let's see the grave of the unknown soldier, which was unveiled in 1925. And when the body of that knight without a blemish was brought there, a boy who might have been 19 or 20, definitely young, although nobody knew the name. When the train was coming from Lvov to Warsaw, on the way, this road took it 3 days. It stopped at every station, every train station in a city, but sometimes in the field. And people would approach this train, small groups of people, rural communities who wanted to touch the coffin of that stalwart soldier. They, uneducated, the ones who suddenly found themselves in independent Poland because they were Poles, because that independence was already part of their lives, but they wanted to touch the coffin of that stalwart soldier because they knew that they owe a lot to those young people. He was one of the eaglets of the Orlęta of Lvov, because that was what came from a national draw. But they understood that he's one of those we need to pay the greatest homage to. Then we have this tradition in the Second World War. The underground Polish state and the home army, the largest in Poland, plus the peasant battalions, national armed forces, and smaller organizations. If on top of that we have also the Polish armed forces in the West, the whole tally gives us the fourth Allied power. And we have our tanks, we have men of war, we have airmen, and Poland not only recreated the civilian authorities in emigration, but also the military one. We were the fourth greatest power. The Allies could not appreciate, they had awareness of that, but the winner was the great politics. Poland, despite of Monte Cassino, despite of Falaise, was sacrificed. Despite this fantastic attitude of Polish airmen, sailors, Tobruk, General Anders' path of victory, capture of Wilhelmshaven by the soldiers of Stanisław Maczek's armored division, despite the decoding of Enigma. The great politics was sacrificed because the Soviet Union was a more attractive partner, because they could have thousands of soldiers. And Polish capacity was just used up earlier. That was the tragic moment of this lost peace. That's how we should say we never betrayed our allies. And there came a moment that we were the only ally for the British, that the Polish airmen really passed the test, that the Polish sailors were with the Royal Navy, that General Anders conducted the decided attack on Monte Cassino, that General Stanisław Maczek captured the largest German maritime base in Wilhelmshaven. And then we were left to fend for ourselves, to the vicissitudes of fate. And that's the message we should share. We're a faithful ally. No one has ever been duped, tricked by us. And we must also say loud that to a certain moment we were guests. And then we were perceived as intruders, because that's how the English started to call us at a certain point in time. And that's this very important moment in our history. And here, speaking of the Second World War, I think it's the highest time to say out loud that Poles provided, as far as it was possible, aid to Jews throughout the occupied Europe, because signals were coming from Poland to the whole world that Auschwitz-Birkenau is death factory. Reports of Jan Karski, reports of Pilecki, these were and still are the documents that are defined as the most important documents of the Second World War. The world didn't want to understand it. Nobody believed the scale of German atrocities and crime committed on Jews, not only Polish Jews, but all the Jews brought to Poland from all around Europe. Those who boarded the trains of death in The Hague, in Paris, in Brussels, or in other cities, they had one-way tickets. Deutsche Bahn, the German railway, sold them tickets. That was not going free of charge. They were taking a train to the place of genocide. They had to pay for those trains. And the whole world could have learned earlier about the scale of this phenomenon if those Polish reports were given appropriate hype, appropriate momentum, if the Polish demand that it's enough to bomb the railway lines to Treblinka, to Auschwitz-Birkenau, to Majdanek in Lublin, to other cities, were Germans, not Nazis, because Nazi is a horrible term that's trying to reduce the scale of German crimes. No, not Nazi. Germans created death factories, and where they dealt death to millions of people from all over Europe. In Auschwitz-Birkenau, not fewer than 1.1 million. In Treblinka, no fewer than 850,000. In the remaining camps, the number of those murdered was counted in thousands. And one needs to discuss it, to speak out loud about it, so that those who don't know the history of Poland, and honestly speaking, the history of Poland is very infrequently present in the history books of various European and world countries. But we need to mention that, so that the information about Polish concentration camps doesn't come back, because they were founded in Poland. People don't understand that somebody, an alien, could do it. They don't know history. They don't know that Poland at the time was occupied, and that those camps were created, were founded by Germans. We also need to speak loud about deportations of Poles to the east, Soviet lagers, 1.5 million people, innocent, who were taken to Siberia only because they were Polish, a very important subject. And I believe that it should also be a leading subject, as it is important for the current historical politics practiced by the German Federal Republic, by the Russian Federation, that are slowly pushing to the margin the responsibility for those events. Not only for cutting that we discussed 2 weeks ago, not only for deportations, but they want to whitewash themselves in the eyes of public opinion and to show that they were states that had nothing to do with the crimes, and Stalin was that good uncle who brought freedom and independence to Europe after conquering the Nazi Germany. Let's now pass on to post-war events. Here, yes, we had this clandestine work again, the underground activity. Many countries can't believe it. How could you have underground activity after the Second World War? There was none in France, US, UK, Belgium, the Netherlands. There was none. And Poles work underground. It turns out that it was necessary because, as I said, Poland won the war, but it lost peace. We were again in such circumstances that forced us to fight against communists. Hence this second underground part. Improbable, but this is characteristic of Central and Eastern Europe. The development of this second underground movement was greatest in Poland, somewhat smaller in Lithuania. And you had traces of that in Czechoslovakia, Hungary. These were the states where the democratic opposition, this clandestine state, was clamoring loudly for freedom. A subject that can raise your brows, but just because this is the continuation of this wartime home army underground secret state, you can easily pass on to this subject and discuss it. Speak out loud about it. There's nothing to be ashamed when we're talking that we keep on thinking about the path leading to the absolute independence, and we want to get rid of Soviet presence in our land. That's something that would be possible only 45 years later, but that process began in 1945, back in 1945, yes. Then we had the bright figure of John Paul II. I believe that this was God helping us, giving us such a great Pole, a man who woke up the conscience of the whole world and also inspired hope into our nation.
And at some point of time, after all those uprisings, the Poznan 1956, I'm going to use my own notions for those events, for some of those events, because some of those events should be called uprisings. What happened in June 1956 in Poznan? It was an uprising. What happened in December 1970 on the coast was another uprising. And due to the shortness of time, I could not explain why I call those events uprising, but this is how I see those. And after those failed attempts in 1956 and then in 1970, and after the students' protests in 1968, and after the protests in 1976 in Radom, at Ursus and in Płock, John Paul II in 1978 gave new hope for freedom to Poles, and hence the Free Trade Union, hence more anti-communist organizations and pro-democracy organizations, and hence we saw the reawakening of the Polish minds and consciousness, and that magnificent solidarity movement that united 10 million people. None other country in Europe, in Central Europe, Central Eastern Europe, none other country had a country like that. It was not just a trade union. It was not a trade union per se. It was a social movement, and it was the movement of people dreaming of independence. And of course, there were many different people, many different representatives of Polish society in that movement. Some of them authentically had been fighting for freedom at the core of the free trade unions, so also the students' organizations beginning with the 1950s, or at the KPN with the drop and so on and so forth. So there were many people who were very much engaged in that fight for independence, but there were also many people who had a different pedigree. They used to be the people of the of the Democratic Union, of the PAX, of the Workers' Party, and so on and so forth. And everyone had the right to change their views, the points of views. And so that was a mass, unique movement. And within and apart from purely trade union type of activities, they were also engaged in political work, and Solidarity was aiming at building New Poland. And once we connect John Paul II with the ideas of the Solidarity movement and with the activities of the Solidarity again, we come up with a beautiful topic, a unique topic, unprecedented topic. And no one can boast having both a Pope and Solidarity at the same time. Because in other countries, we did have some anti-communist organizations, but the numbers were much lower, and they were just going perhaps into thousands or hundreds. But here we have 10 million people who were determined, almost all of them, to march towards New Poland. And then there was the martial law. The martial law, which was a dramatic experience for the Poles. The martial law, not only the military council of introduced the rigor and the regime and was posing a threat to human life, but those were empty shells in the shops. Also, that was a complete stifling scientific, cultural, artistic life. Poland was closed to the entire world. People could not leave Poland. We could not. The only movies that could be featured in cinema theaters were Russian movies, but the Western world was not present here. So that was actually pushing Poland backwards, just like in the Stalin's days. So in fact, the Polish under the martial law was very much reminiscent of the Stalinist Poland, but the Poles did not capitulate. They found their way, and gradually they were recreating their underground structures. And by the end of the 1980s, when the communist authorities once again were compromised, all of that had led to yet another upheaval for independence. It was not that strong, but the situation did change because the communists had to share their power. And they did not do it because of their own good free will. They didn't have any other way out. That was the only option for them under the circumstances. And they actually benefited on it because had there been another solution, then practically speaking, the wind of history would have blown them away from the political life. But here, the communists unfortunately had that great idea. It was their great idea that power had to be shared, because they said that once we share power, it means we still would rule for some time. We would still rule Solidarity for some time to come. And then we would get rid of the Solidarity movement. But that second part did not work for them, because the events unfolded in a different way. And yes, there was that point of time in our history when the Polish United Workers' Party became an outdated party, something completely unacceptable, both for society, but also unacceptable for the party activists themselves. So they themselves understood that the party had no reason to be. And so they started creating new structures, and of course, on the basis of their old experiences, but still, they were no longer a political force number one. And that was something that definitely concluded the worst period in the post-war Poland that started after 1945 and ended at the time when Jan Olszewski, Prime Minister, started establishing the first government. It was on the basis of the first democratic elections, because the elections in 1989, those elections were tainted with all sorts of dealings with national lists. and they were not really reminiscent of the free elections in free Europe or in the United States of America. But Janusza was shaping his government on the basis of the first truly fully democratic elections. And this is something that needs to be talked about clearly, because I think that this is a very good element of our national history, because this is how we can actually combine the victory of the Polish society. We were victorious over the martial law, because this is how we could actually describe it. So in the briefest of the brief, this is how we can name it. And just think, in 1980, on the 13th of December 1981, that was the beginning of the martial law, but the full victory, the full success or partial success was in 1989, and the full success was as late as 1991, that is 10 years later. That was a long path to independence, but it actually did happen. I know that I have been speaking all too long. I have to conclude, but given the topic and given the timeline, we're talking about the timeline of 2 centuries with so many events, it would be very difficult for me to limit myself within 20 minutes. So I do apologize for being so long with my lecture, but I do hope that what I have said will give us an opportunity to start a multifaceted discussion. So thank you very much, and I am at your service. Thank you very much. Professor, I am very, very much impressed, not only by the level of your knowledge, the way you shared that knowledge with us, but also would like to thank you very much. And as we are talking today, of course, this meeting is possible due to technology, and I would like to thank the Janusz Kurtyka Foundation very much, and I would like to avail of this opportunity, and I would like to give the floor to Mr. Paweł Kurtyka, who would share with us his thoughts, because it is due to the Janusz Kurtyka Foundation that we can meet and that we can listen to Professor Walsza. So would Eve, who in such a, I would say, poetic way, very much moving way, was talking about our history. Yes, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor, I would like to thank you for this very broad introduction into our discussion, and the topic that we asked the professor to talk about. This is not a coincidental topic, and my contribution will be such that I will try to put some things in a certain perspective. The Janusz Kurtyka Foundation, as you know very well, in the second half of 2021, started in cooperation with the Chancellor, with the Prime Minister, the project under the title The Seeds of History. And the main goal, the most important goal of this project is to create a platform that would rather be loosely connected by the platform of cooperation in order to promote Polish history in the United States of America and in Canada. So that would be the platform of coordinating activities, different activities within the organizations, with the Polish diaspora organizations. And you represent at this meeting a variety of Polish diaspora organizations. And of course, I'm very grateful to you as the president of the board of the foundation. I would like to thank you for having accepted an invitation to take part in the Seeds of History project and for taking part in this meeting. So we, as the foundation, we are at your service as we deliver some material, and this material is being developed as a part of our statutory mission. And Professor is, in the best sense of this word, the professor gave us this material, so to speak, because this is how we can organize such meetings, such lectures and talks. And of course, we also deliver some literature and historical books that are published by the Kurtyka Foundation. And also, this is how we are trying to shape the agenda of matters that we're talking about, something that the professor spoke about. But as you can see, we are also dealing with a very painstaking and meticulous process of translating this literature. So we are in fact popularizing Polish science and make it more accessible all over the world, and a very important market from the point of view of the global network of inflows and outflows. Of course, the United States of America are very much influential, and Canada is also the center of the Atlantic civilization, which Northern America is. So we see and we observe in our foundation, and that was the direct cause for us to start this project. We saw that our international environment was deteriorating from the point of view of security. Most probably you saw that we saw the publication of a document on the web pages of the Russian government, and there they diplomatically being provocative with regard to the West and NATO EU member states, and they are trying to establish new zones of spheres of influence. So we see that the Russians presume the withdrawal of US troops and NATO troops from the territories of Central Eastern European states, also from the territory of Poland, which would mean that the Republic of Poland would be a second category NATO member state. So as we're talking about hard diplomacy and military diplomacy, then of course we might think, what has it got in common with history? But if we know our past, if we know our history, then for thousands of years in diplomacy games, there were always causes being found to declare wars and to press claims. But also history shapes the image of countries and nations. And recently, in the recent years, and you're probably observing that, we have been dealing with the defamation campaign against Poland. The objective is to attribute the Poles with some labels that are based on semi-truths. For instance, one of such labels is that allegedly the Poles were also taking part in the Holocaust. And Professor is setting up vectors in a different way today. The professor shows that we, the Poles, are very much the ambassadors of the Republic of Poland in the good sense of that notion that we want the world to see us on our good side, so that the world sees the events and the processes that we are proud of. And this is why we asked Professor Wolsza to select a number of events that are so very much important from the point of view of our memory. So he spoke about such events and such processes that give us an opportunity to understand Poland better. That is to say, if you want to learn about Poland, let me tell you about some points in our history that will explain why Poland is so important and why is it worth knowing the history of Poland, and why is it worth being interested in this part of the world. And let me get back to return to the diplomacy topic. So first, we see that the Russians are being more and more challenging, and And we think we will see more of that in how they are going to use their diplomatic channels to affect the image of Poland. But we have to define our past through the prism of facts and research done also by the Polish scientists. So we, as the Poles, could not allow the world to swallow this deceitful propaganda, which presents Poland in the untruthful light, or is marginalizing Poland. And we need to speak vociferously about the events that do matter. So this meeting and this project is a part and parcel of a greater flow of work that needs to be done. So the Seeds of History is the project in which we all take part, and today's debate has the objective of inspiring each other within this free conversation. And just like Professor Wolsza has just spoken, we need to talk about what we need, what you actually need as the Polish diaspora, because you represent the Polish character in Northern America, so that somehow those best events from the Polish history could be presented in your everyday life, in your everyday activities, so that you could also take part in co-shaping the image of Poland in Northern America. And I see my role as of the person who needs to listen to you. We need to see how you define the situation in your countries. We need to see your observations so that we understand better what needs to be done to be more effective. So this is my personal question to you. And this is the question that I would like to address to you. So I do hope that this inspiration that has been shared by Professor Wolsza and the inspiration that he had contributed into our minds, I do hope that this inspiration would also inspire you to take part in this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I could say, Paweł, that our seeds sprout, and we can see it thanks to you, thanks to the foundation, thanks to Professor Wolsza. And now, especially at the beginning of a panel, I always tell people, a boy from Jacków. I'm local, I come from here, I was born here. So I want to ask Dr. Mirowska-Kopeć, the first panelist. She is someone who is so active in Polonia here. It's worth to mention that the foundation that educates here, Mirowska-Kopeć, for a time until recently, has been the only director of a public school in Chicago. And all the time, she also saw to all her patriotic initiatives. So I have plenty of respect for her, and I suggest that we start from her, the president of
Danielu,
the Polish Club. Thank you very much, Daniel. I'm really
ale spróbuję kontynuować. Szanowny panie profesorze, panie Pawle, szanowni panowie uczestniczący w dzisiejszym panelu. Przede wszystkim bardzo chciałabym podziękować panu profesorowi Wolszy za bardzo klarowne usystematyzowanie najważniejszych faktów historycznych, które pokazują nasze polskie losy, które tak okropnie fałszowane są przez różne siły światowe, zarówno w dzisiejszym panelu, jak i przed 2 tygodniami. Oczywiście gwoli wyjaśnienia chcę podkreślić, że absolutnie nie jestem historykiem i broń Boże nie uzurpuję sobie tytułu specjalisty w tej dziedzinie. Natomiast tak jak podkreślił Daniel, jestem praktykiem działalności społecznej i z ogromną pokorą uczestniczę w dzisiejszym panelu. Jako działacz polonijny chcę podzielić się z Państwem pewnymi przemyśleniami, które oparte są na obserwacji tego, co dzieje się w środowisku polonijnym, a także może zasugerowaniu pewnych inicjatyw, które mogłyby pomóc w właśnie kształtowaniu dobrego imienia Polski, naszej historii, właśnie tutaj w Stanach Zjednoczonych, ale na pewno jest to konieczne także na całym świecie. Ogromnie cieszy nas fakt, że Fundacja Janusza Kurtyki zwróciła się do organizacji polonijnych, postrzegając nas jako ambasadorów właśnie tego dobrego imienia Polski, bo tak naprawdę z tego, co ja obserwuję, to do tej pory jesteśmy traktowani jako tacy propagatorzy programu, przepraszam, że tak kolokwialnie powiem, wieś, tańczy i śpiewa, bo tak naprawdę głównie to w takim kontekście pokazywana jest Polonia amerykańska, w szczególności Polonia chicagowska. A prawdą jest to, że na dzień dzisiejszy mamy przeogromną bazę intelektualną, w szczególności w młodym pokoleniu, tak jak Daniel, który aktualnie ubiega się o bardzo ważną funkcję we władzach tutaj stanowych, muszę powiedzieć, i bardzo to cieszy, że mamy tak świetnie wykształconą młodzież. Młodzież, która zajmuje bardzo znaczące stanowiska zawodowe, ale także i społeczne. I myślę, że z tej bazy intelektualnej powinniśmy korzystać w tym celu, by właśnie w języku angielskim, którym musimy funkcjonować, bo tak naprawdę my jako Polonia dużo mówimy, dużo robimy w naszym środowisku, w środowisku polonijnym, ale chyba czas jest na to, żeby wyjść do środowiska amerykańskiego, korzystając z naszej bazy intelektualnej, która świetnie posługuje się językiem angielskim i żeby właśnie tę, przepraszam, że tak powiem, dobrą nowinę o nas, o Polsce, o Polonii nieść w środowisko w pojęciu tym jak najbardziej szerszym. Jaki jest nasz stan, jeśli chodzi o historię? Na pewno szkoły polonijne w fantastyczny sposób uczą historii i wyrabiają te uczucia patriotyczne w młodzieży polonijnej, ale jakby nie ma tej kontynuacji po tym, kiedy dzieci skończą, czy młodzież kończy szkoły średnie i co dalej się dzieje. Mamy organizacje polonijne takie, oczywiście będę mówiła o Związku Klubów Polskich, pod którego auspicjami powstał pomnik katyński, tablica smoleńska, kiedy właśnie 10 kwietnia i 17 września pod pomnikiem odbywają się takie dwie największe patriotyczne uroczystości polonijne, ale także zapraszamy Amerykanów na te uroczystości, żeby pokazać, o co to właściwie chodzi, dlaczego mamy ten pomnik katyński, dlaczego jest tablica smoleńska, dlaczego czcimy 17 września, o co tak naprawdę chodzi w tej naszej historii. W Związku Klubów Polskich organizujemy dożynki, które nie tylko pokazują tę społeczną część, czy kulturalną część, obyczajową część dożynek, ale także dożynki rozpoczyna Teatr Ludowy Rzepicha, pokazując ważne rocznice historyczne właśnie przed rozpoczęciem dożynek i jak część mamy największe wydarzenie polonijne, jakim jest Parada Dnia Konstytucji 3 maja.
the parade of
w
the
której uczestniczą
Constitution Day on
tysiące,
the 3rd of
20
May,
tysięcy, 30
with
tysięcy
participation of
osób,
20,
podczas
30,000
kiedy przez
people,
2 ostatnie lata
while
parada nie mogła
in the
się
last 2
odbyć.
years, of course, the parade
Zorganizowaliśmy
could not
parady
have been
wirtualne
organized. We
i w tych
organized
paradach,
virtual parades,
tegorocznej
and
paradzie
this year's parade
wirtualnie mieliśmy
attracted
ponad
virtually,
40 tysięcy
obviously, more than
odsłon.
40,000 people, so
Także
40,000
rozchodzi się to
online
po
visitors. So
świecie
this is
i
a
myślę, że
message
są to
that
ważne
spreads
rzeczy
to
i
the
jest to
world. I
baza do
believe
tego,
it's a very
żebyśmy mogli
important thing, and that's a
właśnie
good starting
coś
point for
robić
us to be able
więcej,
to do something
by
more,
wyrabiać to
to
dobre
be
imię
able
Polski
to work on
i
that
pokazywać
good name of
prawdziwe
Poland
oblicze
and
naszej
to
historii.
show the true
Co ja
face
uważam
of
jest
our
najważniejsze?
history.
Najważniejsze dla nas
What
byłoby
do
to,
I believe to
żebyśmy
be
jako
most important,
Polonia
most significant,
zaczęli
that we as
współpracować. Bardzo się
Polonia
cieszę, że mamy
start
przedstawicieli
working together.
Polonii
I'm very
kanadyjskiej,
glad that we
że
have
mamy
representatives of
przedstawicieli z
Canadian
Nowego
Polonia
Jorku,
here,
z tego co
that we
zrozumiałam.
have also
I
representatives
tutaj
from New York, as far as I understand.
należałoby,
And this
żebyśmy
is the
wypracowali
point
jakąś
where
linię
we should
współpracy i
work
myślę,
out
że
some
Fundacja Janusza
line
Kurtyki
for
pod
cooperation.
przewodnictwem
I
pana
hope
Pawła
that with Paweł,
mogłaby odegrać
the Kurtyka
fantastyczną
Foundation
rolę
could play a
w tym takim
fantastic role
zjednoczeniu nas i
in
prowadzeniu w
that
jednym kierunku,
unification of
bo
us
na dzień
and
dzisiejszy
leading us
niestety jest mi
in a
bardzo
joint
przykro, ale
direction,
powiem,
because
że
as of today,
żeby
and I'm very
Polonia
sorry to
mówiła
say
jednym
that,
głosem, to
for
tak naprawdę
Polonia to speak in one
jest na
voice,
pograniczu cudu,
that would
więc ja myślę, że
really
możemy tego
border
cudu
on
dokonać,
miracle. So that's
jeżeli
everything
ktoś
save for a
nas
miracle.
jakoś
We could
doprowadzi do tego, że
have
zaczniemy
that miracle
współpracować ze
actually
sobą,
happening if somebody
wykorzystując
will make
naszą
us
bazę
work
intelektualną
together
w młodym
using
pokoleniu,
our
że
intellectual
będziemy korzystać z
base,
tego, że
the
znamy
brain
właściwie
force
wszyscy
of the young
doskonale język
generation.
angielski i
We all
będziemy
actually
mogli
know English
to
perfectly
wszystko
well, and
przełożyć
we'll be
także
able to
na
translate
środowisko
all that also
angielskojęzyczne, czy
into
to
the
w Kanadzie, czy
English-speaking
w
world,
Polsce,
be
czy
it in
w Stanach
Canada, being
Zjednoczonych,
in Poland,
ale może także i
be
na
it in
całym
the
świecie.
US, but perhaps why not
Co byłoby
worldwide as
świetne,
well.
gdybyśmy właśnie
That would be
korzystali z
fantastic
tych
if
materiałów,
we
które Państwo do
used
nas już
the
przysłali,
materials that
a
you've
może jeszcze
already
będą jakieś inne
sent to
materiały,
us.
którymi
Perhaps there
będziemy
will be
mogli się
some
dzielić
others that we'll be able to share
ze środowiskiem angielskojęzycznym.
among the
My
English
tutaj z naszej
speakers.
strony oczywiście te wszystkie materiały
Obviously,
dzielimy się
we
tymi
here
materiałami
share whatever we
z
receive
Polonusami,
with
którzy
the Polish
już może
people,
nie
with
mówią po
people from the
polsku,
Polish
ale
diaspora,
zainteresowani są
even the ones who
tym,
no longer
żeby
speak
pełnić
Polish, but
funkcję
who are
tych
just
ambasadorów.
interested in this
Także
function of the
wydaje mi się też,
ambassadors.
że bardzo ważne są
I have such a
te
feeling
inicjatywy
that it's very
oddolne, w
important to
których
have the
ci
grassroots
ambasadorzy
initiatives
będą
in which all
uderzać do
those
środowiska
ambassadors would be
amerykańskiego i
involved,
opowiadać,
addressing the
przedstawiać tę naszą
Americans
historię.
and presenting our
Ale na
history.
pewno potrzebna jest ta
But
akcja
what you
zmasowana całej
certainly
Polonii.
need
I
is
jeszcze raz
this
tutaj zwróciłam
mass
się do Fundacji
action, mass
Janusza
activity of
Kurtyki.
whole Polonia,
Kierujcie
and
nami,
this is
a my
where
jesteśmy
I
gotowi do
address
działania.
the Kurtyka
Także może
Foundation
na tyle, nie chciałabym
leaders,
za
and
dużo
we're ready
czasu
for action.
zajmować.
I
Tyle z
wouldn't like
naszej
to impinge
strony
too far on your
w tej
time.
chwili. Bardzo
That's
dziękuję za
what
udzielenie głosu
I've had
i
to say.
jeszcze
Thank you
raz
very
bardzo
much for
dziękuję
giving me
panu
the floor
profesorowi,
once
panu
again,
Pawłowi
Professor
za to,
and
że
Paweł.
dzisiaj
Thank you
jesteśmy
very
tu
much
razem.
for
Może
being
tak
here
dużo
together
nie ma
today.
uczestników
Perhaps there
naszego
aren't
panelu,
so
ale
many
kiedy damy
participants in
to
the
na
panel,
Facebook,
but
kiedy będzie na
once
YouTube,
this
myślę,
is
że
on
więcej
YouTube
osób
and
obejrzy
Facebook,
tę
I believe there will
rozmowę
be
naszą
more
dzisiejszą
people to
i dotrzemy do większej
learn
ilości
about
ludzi.
what
Dziękuję
we've
bardzo.
discussed today, and we will reach larger numbers of people. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. I must say that it's always a pleasure to be listening to you. And as we all know, this is something really fantastic. So I'm asking the next gentleman if you could perhaps share your comments. Good afternoon, good evening, welcome everyone. I'm so thankful for being invited, and it's very good that I can still hear some extra sounds. Can you hear me well? Bartłomiej, if you
tak, przepraszam bardzo, już wyciszam.
switch your microphone off. Done. Thank you very much for that invitation, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. It's good that Kurtyka Foundation has addressed this problem, and I believe I have made a certain contribution to that. This year I spent 2 months in Poland, and at the Chancellery of the President of the Republic of Poland, we discussed some things, and the defense of the good name of Poles is something I've done for 20 years. I actually ran the committee for the defense of good name of Poles. At that time, this was the time of the government of civil platform, and as we had somewhat different opinion on certain subjects, especially concerning Volhynia, and the late Professor Lech Kaczyński was even attacked for misconducting that commission. It's just to show you how very topical those subjects are in Poland. Thank you very much, Professor, for your lecture, for this introduction. I've seen your previous lecture, the one of the 4th December, concerning the cutting issues. So just some words. We're in Toronto, and Toronto is the place where the first cutting memorial was built on public ground, because the real first was built in London, but it was within a cemetery, while ours was in public land in 1980, with a lot of protestation from the Soviet embassy and still Polish embassy as well. And then in 2011, after all the efforts here in Toronto on this public ground, also the Smolensk obelisk was built, commemorating our compatriots who died at Smolensk. That's just an introduction. Other than that, the foundation and the late Janusz Kurtyka were connected to the Toronto branch of Canadian Polonia, which I represent here. There were connections, and we exchanged letters about the crimes on Poles perpetrated in the region of Vilnius and Novogródek, so in the area of today's Belarus and Lithuania, about the crimes from the time of Second World War. Naliboki and Koniuchy were the names of locations, and by the initiative of the Congress, investigations were started, and at the time, Professor Kurtyka was the head of the Institute of National Remembrance. We even exchanged letters. The professor was supposed to visit us. What happened did happen. We all know what, and there have been some spiritual ties, at least, between us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if I could give you a word of introduction, because we've dealt with these matters for quite a long time. In Toronto, the Committee for Defense of Good Name of Poles, was set up in the 1990s, when the local press quite often used this mental shorthand, which is still present in the media, Polish concentration camps, namely. One of the papers, which is very popular here, would present such terms, and we rallied at the time. There was a big demonstration at the Toronto Star publishing house, and the effect was that something finally changed, and plenty of Poles simply refused or discontinued subscription of Toronto Star. That's how it all started, and we continue this. And in these years, we mostly focus on what is broadly understood as promotion of the Polish achievements and achievements of Poles, and we can systemize all those matters a bit. Outside Poland, you often say that there are nearly 20 million people who acknowledge their Polish roots.
So those are our compatriots, and it's worth noting that this is a powerful force, and also we should see that many times those are people who have attained a certain level, that is both material and intellectual level, and their communities where they live. And this is a remarkable potential that is not fully used, and it could have been better coordinated, and we lack this coordination among the Polish diaspora and those Poles who live along the Vistula River. So as for the image of the Poles and the Polish diaspora, there are three groups. First, we're trying to promote the contribution of the Poles in the civilizational development of the world, and this is our global presence. And here we can mention a number of great names. Not a Ben. Many times those were Poles who emigrated from Poland after uprisings, and there were larger groups after the November uprising, January uprising, but it's not the time to speak about those particular events, but that's worth mentioning. And another element that we deal with is telling the truth about the Polish history and the fighting lies about the Polish history. And we're talking about the history of the Poles and the history of Poland during World War II and after World War II. And many times there is so much deceitful information also in the West, and also in the official curriculum of education, as far as educational system is concerned here in the West. Many times World War II is considered to begin with the attack on Pearl Harbor and not with the attack on Poland by Nazi Germany and by the Soviet Union. And the third element that we're dealing with that is the defense of the good name of the Poles and the Polish diaspora and of Poland. And yes, we know some people use this absurd notion of the so-called Polish concentration camps, and we know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is dealing with that problem, but still we have those absurd statements. And 2 or 3 years ago, in one of the university publications here, they were speaking of the Polish SS, that is at the Białystok ghetto operation. So we see that sometimes there are some false informations that are still present in the media space. And so we're trying to see what is it that is the essence of the Polish diaspora organizations. And the Polish diaspora organizations are there to keep up the Polish identity abroad, and for those who live abroad. And what is identity? It's the language, it's the culture, it's the faith, it's our history specifically, and also those are the matters that are related to our past. And generally speaking, it's also about taking care of the Polish raison d'être and of the good name of the Poles. And I wanted to speak somewhat longer, but I'll try to speak a bit shorter. Perhaps we should think together. Maybe we should better utilize the already existing channels so as to move on with these historical matters, because it's actually is the remit of the political history, historical policy of the Polish state, and perhaps we need to take some action, as this gives us a more influence through our democratic process in the countries that we live. And I think that together we can do things together, and this is how we can shape proper narrative on the historical policy about the Polish state. And perhaps we should somehow systematize this narrative and set up priorities, because many times in this within the space of the Polish diaspora organizations, many times, many organizations eagerly deal with Copernicus, Kościuszko, and so on and so forth. And of course, they are very significant, they are very important. But nevertheless, we know that history is about the past, but we live today in the present. And perhaps we should operate in the modern space. And of course, and one of the most important problems that we're dealing today with, those are the matters that are related to World War II, and in particular, Polish-Jewish relations. And there is nothing to conceal that Mr. Gross's narrative or Mr. Grabowski's narrative in Canada or in Poland, Barbara Engelking presents narrative, and they have an impact on how Polish society is perceived in the West. And I think that this is our common lesson, that that's our homework that we need to do together. And I have been appealing for that for many years in cooperation with the Institute of National Remembrance. We need to have access to some set of materials. Luckily, the latest publication by the IPN, they also address the narrative by Mr. Gross, and Mrs. Engelgrim and Tomasz Domański also presented his material. And I think that those are the publications, the type of publications that need to be translated into the English language, and they should be disseminated here in the West. Of course, it is not to say that we should not deal with the matters of the Polish history, because this is what actually does shape the image of Poles in Poland, but we need to set our priorities in such a way so that we can react to the problems, respond to the problems that arise today. And another important issue that I personally have problems with, that is that in the Western mass media, Poland is presented as a non-democratic country today, as a country where on the 11th of November we have fascists and nationalists on the streets in Poland. And this is where we could do something together so as to change this image and to show that those are Polish patriots, that it's got nothing in common with nationalism. And I personally see that in conjunction with an unpleasant situation, with a rather unpleasant situation, Polish situation in the EU, because right now Poland is fighting for this sovereignty, proper sovereignty in Europe. And if we totally yield to the European recommendations, we will disappear in this multiculturalism, and we have examples of that here in Canada. This is a multicultural society, and God forbid to think about the time when some will have to present his or her point of view on one or the other side, and people will have problems with identification. I could say so much more, but I would like to thank you for this invitation. And my appeal is, I appeal to you, let us unite forces. Let us use the foundation for coordination purposes, and with your permission, and with those of you who would like to take part in it, I do believe that we need to set a list of priorities, because even we need to think about publications. There are so many publications today that may be promoted because they do respond, they do address many different issues. Of course, we should not forget about matters of history. And so this is my main message. Thank you very much, Mr. Cytowski. And here we have many people who actually speak English. And so let me just, should I just change to English, because I'm going to speak English right now. And I would like to introduce Mr. Dzień Sokołowski. But Before I do so, for the Polish listeners, I just would like to say a few words about Mr. Sokołowski, because he is quite an interesting person. He emigrated on the law on the Displaced Persons Act, and his father went through 4 German concentration camps, and he grew up in a Swedish Christian home. He was a professional career officer dealing at Air Force, and once retired, he worked as a system analyst at Northern Grumman, and then he worked as a communication specialist with the federal government. He has undergraduate degrees in mathematics and German, graduate degrees in systems management and science and technology policy, and a doctorate in public policy. He also is a graduate of the Elliott of the International School of George Washington University and the Doctor of Humanist Studies at the Public Policy School at the George Mason University.
Tutaj włączam na English.
So let me switch to English now.
Yes, thank you. So, Dr. Sokołowski, what an honor to have you here with us. Would you be so kind and share with us your thoughts about the lecture, about how we can better engage the Polish community, whether it's in the United States or in Canada?
Sure, thank you very much. I would like to express my appreciation to Mr. Kurtyka for this opportunity to present on behalf of our organization, PASI EDU, Polish American Strategic Initiative Education Organization, and also to express on behalf of PASI EDU to Professor Walsh, extraordinary lecture, highly informative, very compelling. I took 6 pages of notes, so that should tell you something, but I submit that the positive acts of courage, honor, and integrity that Professor Walsh pointed out, these do define Poland's history. It confirms its good name, and I think also I would go on to say that it represents, I think, the essence of the Polish people. One of the proposals I would submit for consideration is in promoting and caring for Poland's good name. I think through academia is certainly worth considering seriously. We should promote Polish scholarship in American academia. That's a challenge, we know that, but we know it must be done. I think if you look at the current state, the field of Polish studies, we don't have the influence or interest necessary to establish a university chair or a department of Polish studies. And I think you'll find that, you know, there are academics who research Polish topics, but of course they generally teach less focused courses, maybe political systems, international relations, general European history, that sort of course. And I think instead I would submit that a key solution would be for the Polish government to endow a prestigious U.S. university and establish a university chair and Department of Polish Studies. And I would also submit that the excellent Polish scholarship and in the English language that is consistently provided through the Janusza Kurtyka Foundation, I think this will introduce very important and very necessary Polish element, I think, into mainstream intellectual debates. We at PASI EDU are also concerned about caring for Poland's good name. We look at threats, for example, misrepresentations, the material omissions. I think these have already been identified by a number of our panel members. But many of our, shall we say, the positive acts or the positive events that Professor Walsh outlined, some of these are maybe absent in academic and public literature. And however, because of that, they constitute a significant material omission, or they represent effectively an intellectual void. Let me just offer one example. You know, one of these omissions, one of these material omissions is Hitler's genocide of Poles. And this is, of course, historical fact, but it's virtually unknown among Americans because, you know, the scholarship on this is absent in our academic literature. I would submit that another significant omission is, well, Hitler's kidnapping of the many thousands of Polish children for Germanization under the Lebensborn program. And I think you'll find that, according to the UN, this action is actually one of the 5 forms of genocide. So I would submit that one of the things we're trying to do at PASA EDU is to address and correct these misrepresentations and omissions. And we also believe that an American academic platform of Polish studies and also the excellent Polish scholarship that's available through the Janusza Kurtyka Foundation, I think these can be significant contributions. Let me end by stating, I think that the current state in America that we have here, I think we have an exceptionally uninformed public. I think we all recognize that. And as also, I think, pointed out earlier, I think the public unwittingly accepts misrepresentative narratives, the incomplete narratives, the narratives that, of course, have the material omissions. And they accept these as factual. And the overall result, unfortunately, is I think that Poland tends to be viewed many times in a less than favorable light. So this is what I would offer for consideration. And I hope that, I hope that we can assist you in this endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing that with all of us. It's very appreciated. Bardzo dziękuję panu profesorowi za to.
I'd like to thank Professor for sharing with us his thoughts. Right, Mr. Chabrowski, please. Mr. Chabrowski.
Na wstępie znów nie chcę tutaj tracić czasu na szczegóły czysto techniczne, także as I said, there's no problem for me to speak English, of course, but as a member of the Polonia or Polish organization, I'm more used to speaking Polish than English, but so I'll be, by necessity, I'll be much more brief, but the thing is, in general, I had a really impression of our today's conference, our today's meeting being more like a brainstorming, how to get the general ideas, how to get into the future of our dealings, our volunteer participation, in my opinion, the key to the success, to the future success, would be somehow to activate the members of the younger generations of Polonia. I'm quite sure you know that the American Polonia of younger generation it's quite a big number. In Canada also we have quite a big number of younger members of the Polonia, and sorry to say, but my impression is younger Polonia is much less active. I can only say it, of course, as a participant about the Canadian Polonia. Younger Polonia in Canada is much less active than us, or even people that were kind of, active in generations that were before us, So basically, even our panel today, we are talking about history, we are talking about politics, but I'm just trying to find the proper wording, Do you really think that just by talking about politics only and history, by the way, this is one of my hobbies as the amateur historian, but we are not, in my opinion, we are not trying to educate ourselves. We should try to educate more the young generation. And I have more questions than answers, actually. I'm directing my question to the panelists, all the panelists here. Do you think this is the right way to somehow to activate younger generation of Polonia, American Polonia, European Polonia, or Canadian Polonia, only by talking about history? for me, this is really important. For them, me dealing with a really young generation, being a Polish Scouting Association instructor for over 15 years, I know that we can get to those young minds more with the different methods, with the different priorities, not only by the dwelling only about the pure history or pure politics. For me, I can talk for hours, no, of course, especially in Polish, but for them, I don't think that would be a right or the perfect way to somehow make those young minds more active. Maybe the situation in Poland is totally different. Me being a very, very old Polonus, I've been in Canada for well over 40 years, but basically, I'm just directing my question to everybody else here, how to get to those younger minds, how to make them more active. And basically, like I said, Professor Wolsza speech at the beginning, lecture at the beginning was very, very valuable, but I had a kind of impression that I was hoping that will be more exchange of ideas, exchange of future ideas, how to go about it to get young Polonia more active in the future. Thank you very much. Teraz zwrócę się do pani Weroniki albo do pana Pawła. Prawdopodobnie mogę jeszcze mówić w języku polskim, ale krótko mówiąc, nie wiem, jak to byłoby od strony technicznej, bo z tego, co słyszałem, to w języku polskim były jakieś kłopoty. Więc czy to byłyby kłopoty z tłumaczeniem na angielski, czy to byłyby kłopoty, żeby mnie ktoś, że tak powiem, rozumiał po polsku?
Right, thank you, Bartłomiej. We don't have much time, and we are very keen on Mr. Szybowski addressing us as well. So thank you very much for your contribution. And I'm now asking Mr. Szybowski to share some thoughts. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me. I'd like to thank the Institute. I'm not going to repeat what the previous speakers said. I fully agree with what you were saying, and I'll only touch upon some aspects that can be important to discuss in the future. First, language. 80, if not 90% of the young cannot use, and I'm very sorry to say so, they can't use the lecture of the professor here. There is this language gap, and we've got to work on it. We have a school, library, and gallery of culture. The foundation has operated for 48 years. So the language aspect is there. We know that Janusz Kurtyka Foundation is very keen on having all those materials in English. The other aspect is that we not only focus on the events that are important for us Poles, very often these are there is no success. And to reach those young people, we must find positive moments in our history, not forgetting the tragic ones. The Battle of Warsaw was one of the successes. And rather than focus only on the recent history, we should work on all of it, because otherwise there is this huge gap. In case of Americans, I mean, those from the US, it's hard to identify with Poland because all you have is just fragmentary information. Another very sorrowful thing, we're talking about the defense of our good name. Here on the Eastern Shore, we had that situation with the Cutting Memorial, and I must say that as Polonia, we didn't pass the test. Most organizations supported transfer of it, also representatives of the Polish government. And here, just thanks not to the organizations, but a group of people gathered among the Committee for the Defense of Cutting Monument and also Polish Cultural Foundation. We protested against that in writing. If we want to obtain the defect, we must clear the environment. It can't be so that we're meeting by the monument. It's organized by the group who wanted to transfer it, and then the authorities together with the council come to that. That brings a bad message to our young people and also for the Americans. When it comes to some institutional activity, I'd suggest, well, I believe it's also true for other countries. Americans don't respect weak people. If we are a pariah begging, this will not end well. Poland, our country, has plenty to offer. We've got nothing to beg for, and we just have to respect ourselves. Speaking of other moments, the first transport of Poles to Auschwitz, 14th of June, many organizations simply hide their heads in the sand. I don't know what is there to be ashamed of. I'd simply suggest that we act together and that we actually follow a joint plan. And here the role of the foundation would be very useful, as the previous speakers mentioned. And for the lack of time or knowledge, we cannot prepare some packages of information concerning different types of problems. In the briefest of a brief, that's it. I'm sorry, I'll have to be leaving you in a moment. We'll have our Christmas Eve supper at 1 p.m. That's how we are trying to share those seeds of history. Of course, we're starting with the Polish national anthem. I'm sorry to be so chaotic, but I just want to say that we can't pretend that these problems are not there. I must just say that I met an elderly person and she had tears in her eyes and she said, Tomasz, when the PZPR was at power, you had the same people with the council. When there was the civil platform, the same people were coming to the council, and now nothing's changed. I didn't know what to tell her. Perhaps we together can have an answer and have an opportunity perhaps to do something. And this meeting has really given me an opportunity to believe that we can do something. Thank you very much, Mr. Szybowski. I would first like to say that here in Chicago, Illinois, US, we've got so many fantastic leaders, and I've just been told by Mr. Niziemski that he's listening to our good symposium with considerable interest. He's somebody who has rendered huge services, but first, Łucja Mirowska-Kopeć, doctor, she has just shared some thoughts with us, and we'd like to return to her. I'll be very brief because we should also hear the so-called voice from the people, from the floor, from the people who observe us, who participate in this conference. I'd just like to discuss ad vocem the problem of a lack of activity of the young generation. This is a pain in Polonia organizations, but it's also a global trend. Young people don't want to do any organizational work. They don't want to volunteer. And we also discuss it here in Chicago, what to do to have the young generation activated. We should probably meet at a panel with other organizations and jointly say what to do to have the younger generation interested in activity, and by joining this activity that they could also try to achieve those goals of the ambassadors for the good name of Poland. That's something I would like to encourage. And perhaps through the Kurtyka Foundation, we'll be able to achieve that jointly, achieve that together. Could I now ask to start tackling the questions and answers? Thank you. Right, still waiting for Daniel. I will let myself wrap up this stage of our discussion, namely, as the organizer of the meeting today and of the project, we don't have any idea to manage to create a movement or some kind of federation of organizations. We believe that the Kurtyka Foundation should be the inspirer, the provider of certain logistic solutions, because I also have quite a lot of knowledge about the past of such attempts. If there was an organization that tried to be a leader, especially of the Polonia, in most cases, this didn't come to a happy ending. So reaching for those early traditions, we'd like to use this distributed system. And I believe that what's important for us is the idea, is the purpose, is the goal, and we all agree about that. We animate them and we provide this, we provide logistics as well. As Janusz Kurtyka Foundation, we perceive ourselves as providers of content, of the materials of those books. We can do something more, because if we manage to do what we want to do, listening also to what you want, we'd like to launch an English-speaking education portal in the next year, or provide you with more lighter materials, not scientific books, but something that would be shorter, like some succinct brochures, or perhaps also more popular science. Obviously, when it comes to the subjects, we can travel the space of history, because this is this specific area of the foundation. Naturally, myself and all my team also live on that situation, but we simply recognized, and starting the foundation, I recognize that my purpose is not to deal with the whole world, but just in this case, we boiled it down to the question of the promotion of the past. And the past is a major problem for us due to all those falsified accounts. So to achieve a major success here would be to achieve a gigantic success if we manage to do it together. So we're not going to persuade you to deal with some other spaces, and the seeds we're going to sow may be translated into some joint cooperation, and this dynamic of changes may take place somewhere between your organizations. I'm very glad to see this subject that was taken up by Jean Sokołowski.
Jakby znając historię katedry harwardzkiej, która gdzieś tam chyba
about the chairs of Polish studies. I believe that Harvard wanted to have a chair of Polish studies, but we know the success of the Ukrainian chair in Harvard, which is a background for comparisons, even for comparative studies. We see how important a question that is, and here in the Kurtyka Foundation we realize that. And we will try to further that course, because we'd like to develop those reports next year. And one of them will concern the way of expanding that impact on the academia, but it's also about promoting Polish science in this form. All those academic outposts that would carry this banner into the world of the academia. Thank you very much for that insight. Yes, I subscribe to a point of view. Speaking of Polonia, Polish people who don't speak Polish, we translate as the foundation these books for two purposes. One is to provide Americans or Canadians with knowledge that they're non-Poles, and the other is to provide this historical information for the generation of Polonia who no longer speak Polish. There is a huge barrier, and Professor Wolsza will probably confirm that there's hardly anything published in English on the latest history. We don't know why, and sometimes it is so that publications of the Institute of National Remembrance, if they're published in English, that's an internal publication, and the distribution network often fails to reach to the other side of the ocean, unless Mr. President brings it. You can buy it at Przystanek Historia. It's not like our books, which are available on Amazon, and you can just one-click them to your home. So we realize fully that such phenomena are there, and that's why the materials we try to provide look what they look like. And we see plenty of potential in your organizations, and we'd like you independently or in some kind of dialogue with all of us, with all the members of this network of the Seeds of History, that you discussed how to use the ammunition that the foundation has provided you with. We don't know our way around it. We can't see it from Poland as well as you do, and we'll never see it this way. That's it. We know our limitations, our cognitive limitations. We may listen to you, and we may be adjusting those materials, and they must meet your needs the best way they can, but we won't be able to grasp this knowledge you have about your friends, Canadians, Americans, or about the needs of the young people. And of course, materials about the war and defeats are not perhaps the most inspiring, and that's true. But other than that, we'd like to enter those areas that are lighter. But the agenda of translations here is such that we must first publish the materials or books that are connected to the key issues which we find a problem today. The ones where there's plenty of false information, and we want to react to those first. That's my comment to your suggestions, and I'd like to thank you very, very warmly for those suggestions, because we find them extremely, extremely useful, helpful on proposing the further steps to cooperate, and we will certainly consider those. So now the floor goes to Daniel again. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to talk. It's really something that I believe is a very useful work. I believe this is my positivism speaking.
That's a positive attitude that is working with the basics, and it is working with the basics. So I do hope that in the future, our group will become larger in the future. But before we conclude on this positive note, I think that we can say that undoubtedly we can further this cooperation. So we have a local initiative where Pavel, you had an opportunity in our quarter of town. You could see what we did, and some of you have seen the work that we have done together with Mrs. Kopacz and also with Mr. Mirosław Midziński from Illinois. We named the place, we called it the Solidarity Triangle. And the Solidarity Triangle actually is a very strong reference, and it's in Chicago, which is the capital of the Polish diaspora in the north. And so it was the Polish downtown in the past. So in Chicago, we had not only just downtown, but we had the Polish downtown in Chicago. So why am I mentioning that? Not only because the Polish diaspora is active here, and also we spoke to a member of the council who last week already started his work, and also Mrs. Mirosław Kopacz and Mr. Midziński will also speak to our city council, and they're going to explain why it is so important. But for instance, to have in the English language some materials that will tell the story and present information in the English language, so those people who come to this square, and that they could read about solidarity, so that we would have more information about solidarity here in Chicago. So it's important for us to cooperate. By this, I would like to conclude, and now I would like to give the floor to Veronica. Thank you very much for this meeting. It's been very interesting. And does Mr. Kurtyka wish to speak? Yes, just I would, Mr. Daniel, I just remember that there was a commentary from someone who is not a panelist. No, I have not seen any message, but I had a text message from Mr. Midziński, who is watching us as I speak, and he has just sent me a text message that he is listening with great interest to this great meeting. And I do hope that next time it's just the prologue, not the epilogue, as that we will have an opportunity to listen to Mr. Midziński next time as he speaks on behalf of the president of the Congress of Polonia in the US, just like Mrs. Mirosław Kopacz. And Daniel, if I just may, just a few words, if I may, please, with your kind permission. I know that it's quite late, but I'm going to be brief. I just wanted to make a commentary on something that seems to me to be of great significance. Yes, I shall listen to you with pleasure. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, there is no need to convince the already convinced, to preach to the converted. And all of us who take part in this meeting, we all realize how important it is to talk about these matters. And we have our opinions already shaped about our proposal. Our message should be addressed to those who are not convinced yet, or we need to address it to those who are very young. And they are in the beginning of their education. And if this campaign is not addressed to the young generation, then it may happen that our message will be all too late, and that it will reach out to someone when someone else will already master the minds of those young people. The reason I'm saying this is that this problem of low level of knowledge is not only the problem with the young Polonia that is dispersed all over the world, in the US, Canada, and the UK. Historical knowledge is weak also here, is poor also here in Poland. And if we look at the history lessons, and that's very much reduced history lessons right now, and many times Polish students, Polish pupils either do not have some basics and do not know basics about history, or what is even worse in the school textbooks or at the history lessons, then knowledge is limited to the period of early Polish People's Republic, and then for many different reasons that knowledge is no longer passed on to the next generation. So this is quite a problem with the Polish youth dispersed all over the world, but it's also the problem with the Polish youth in Poland. And as far as the methods of reaching out are concerned, and of course, there are many different ways for advocacy. And a young book will not reach, is not the best way to reach out to young people. It's too difficult, too long, and not attractive enough. So I think that there are other forms of reaching out to the youth. And for many years, I have, for 10 years, I have been a member of the collegiate body of the Institute of National Remembrance, and it controls the operations of the Institute on the ordinance of the Polish Parliament. And Karol Nawrocki, the president, wishes to reach out to the young generation with the use of the internet, because this seems to be an easier and more attractive form of reaching out to the youth. So we need to utilize new technology. And this is something that is very much adopted by the young generation. And instead of scientific books, depending on the age group, it could be done on the basis of comic books, movies, documentaries, competitions, exhibitions, and so on and so forth. So this is something that is being practiced these days. But I'm speaking about publications in the English language, so that we need to publish things like that in the English language. And what may change the situation, but this is what Paweł Kurtyka spoke about. If it is to be published in the English language, but then it stays in the warehouses in Poland, then there is no point, there is no benefit. All these publications must find their way across the pond or to the British Isles or to some other countries. And this is where the problem is. That is the problem with actually making sure that these publications are reaching out to those people who wish to read them, the comics books or some other materials or exhibitions that are being prepared in the English language. They need to reach the addressee, because if we do not arrange for that, then you can go on with publishing thousands of books about Poland in the English language, but if no one reads them, there is no point, because those books will not reach their addressee. So this is one of the most important problems that we're dealing with, that is distribution and making sure that those publications reach their target audiences. And of course, the Institute of National Remembrance may ship the books free of charge. And that is the mission of the Institute after all. And so please do take that into consideration. So if we can organize this type of an exchange, then this would be to the benefit of all here in Poland, but also to you across the pond. So it's important to make sure that these publications do reach the target audience. And as far as the adult population are concerned, there are many books that are translated into the English language. That is, those are the books that the Institute considers to be very important, and that is a very large-scale type of operation. But many specialists and researchers, Mr. Chabrowski spoke about Polish-Jewish relations, and there are Polish-Jewish studies published in the English language by the Institute of National Remembrance, and there is a very well-developed discussion with the people who have a different point of view on those relations. That is the point of view that differs from the point of view of the Institute of National Remembrance. So we're not hiding, we're picking up the subject, but we need to deal with the basics. We speak about the young, we think about the young generation, those who no longer speak Polish or do not have good command of Polish, and they would feel much more comfortable with the literature in the English language. Then, of course, we do have the materials, we do have text, but we need to think about how to reach out to those who need this type of information. And this is my appeal to you. So perhaps we need to think about that in the future. That's all. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Mr. Nijiński is here with us. So technically speaking, he is with us. I'm just thinking whether we can give the floor to Mr. Nijiński. Mr. Nijiński, please switch on your mic. Do you hear me? Please confirm. Yes, we do. Yes, we hear you. I'm the president of the Congress of American Polonia. I would like to thank you, to congratulate you on this project that is the seed of history, and to sow the seed in North America, in the US and Canada. And I see two directions of activities. So one direction of activities is education, is educating the diaspora, but another field of activities is defending the good name of Poland. And as a representative of the Congress, that's my mission. And there was this idea to perhaps to have the chairs established of Polish studies at the universities. That is long-term and very expensive type of activity, but I spoke to Mr. Karol Nawrocki from the Institute of National Remembrance, and I mentioned the following proposal. There are possibilities of setting up the so-called symposia that is running symposia at universities of renown and good repute in the US, and to speak about Polish-Jewish relations during World War II. So this is something to talk about. We, as the Congress, we cooperate with the Holocaust Museum in the state of Illinois, and we cooperate with them very well. We ran two quite interesting initiatives. One of them was devoted to the memory of Jan Karski. And that was a meeting a month and a half ago. And last year, we also had a meeting devoted to Pilecki. And they are very much interested in cooperation. They could sponsor such symposia. Therefore, it's important to provide for funding. And I know that there are people who are well connected with the US universities, and to use that as a forum so as to change the image of Poles. And I keep on meeting such situations when we are stigmatized as anti-Semites, and that sometimes they claim that together with the Germans, Poles are responsible for the Holocaust and for the Holocaust of the Jewish population, and they forget that the Poles were dying. That apart from 3 million, more than 3 million Jews, also 3 million Poles died. And so we need those symposia, and there are people who can help with that. And when we talk about articles in the press, then of course this reaches out to a smaller group of people. But if we organize a symposium very well, then we can present a different point of view. Of course, that's a topic for a longer discussion. I do not wish now to delve into detail about it, but the point is that the Polish diaspora has this immense potential, but right now we're being dispersed with many different things like memorial plaques, boards, monuments. Yes, this is important, but it is important to deal with the bad image and with the lies about the Poles, and we need. I think that this is what we can do in the years to come. So that's my suggestion, and in the future would like to take part in the next panel discussion if it is possible. And I think that there is a way for us to present our vision and our understanding of what was happening during World War II, after the war. And this may be presented. So someone said, I think it was Stalin who said that a lie told 100 times becomes truth. So let us remember about that threat. So once again, I would like to congratulate you on the previous meeting, on this meeting, and I would like to thank you very much for that. Many thanks. Thank you. And as for the symposium, here we can see a symposium on Congressman Roman Kuczynski, and it is due to Congressman. The Cotton case had a case opened at the Congress of the United States of America due to Congressman Kuczynski. And speaking about Polish-Jewish relations, we remember him as a Polish patriot. However, for the American audience, I would like to add that he also was considered to be a patriot of the State of Israel. And when he spoke at the Congress of the US, he was promoting the idea of inviting Israel to NATO. So here we can see a symposium that took place in Chicago a couple of years ago. So, well, I know we're late. I know that we have exceeded our time. I know that we are supposed to finish. It's quite late in Poland. So it is over to Veronica. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I would like to thank you very much for attending today's meeting, and I would like to thank you for taking part in our project, that is the Seeds of History. And it was a great pleasure for me to be in touch with you. I've learned so much. I've received so much information from you. And I do hope that this is a beginning of very fruitful cooperation. I do encourage all of you to follow our social media. The video material, the video recording of the meeting with the historians and of this meeting will be made available both in the Polish and English languages very soon. Thank you very much and goodbye. Thank you very much for a kind invitation. Many thanks. Thank you very much for taking part in this meeting and in this debate. Thank you very much. Goodbye.